Hello everyone, it's Treasure here again with the 3D animation course in Blender. Now in this lesson we're going to finally get into our 3D software of choice, Blender. I hope you're ready. However, this lesson is divided into two phases. The navigation phase, which will familiarize you with the 3D software, and the creation phase where you make your first creations in Blender. Let's get started. Hello everyone, thank you for sticking with us on the 3D animation crash course with Blender. We're still in our first chapter, Introduction to Blender, and in this chapter we will be dwelling on the practical side of working with Blender. So now this particular video has been divided into two phases, navigation and creation. In the navigation phase, we'll be focusing on familiarizing you with Blender's UI. We're talking about how to navigate the viewport, how to interact with objects, how to manipulate objects, the few basic UI functions you need to know to use the software seamlessly. Now in the creation phase, we'll be taking the knowledge from the navigation phase, and now we are going to be creating a scene from scratch in Blender. And by the end of the creation phase, you would have made your first 3D render in Blender. So if you're coming from our last video, you should have Blender installed on your system, and it should look like this. If you are not seeing it, just type on your search bar, your Windows search bar, just type Blender and it should appear. Now, the reason there are multiple Blender versions here is because I have multiple versions of Blender. However, if you install the one that we installed in our installation video, you should be using Blender 4.0, and that's what should appear here. So you can pin this to your start menu so that it's always on your start menu, or you can pin this to your tags bar so that it's always appearing here. So once you have this, just click on it and it should open. So when you open Blender for the first time, Blender 4.0 for the first time, this is how it should look. Before we move in, there's just one thing I want you to do, which is make sure that this select width is left, and make sure this spacebar, instead of play, I want you to make sure that this is search. Now, the reason I want you to put this on search is so that when you click on the keyboard, if you click on the spacebar on your keyboard, it's going to give you an option to search things up. So this will help you as a beginner, because sometimes you might want to do something in Blender, but you are not sure what button does it. You can simply just search out what you are looking for, and Blender will show you where that thing is and what the shortcut for it is. However, if you have opened Blender before and you did not see that start menu that I just showed you, just follow what I'm doing right now. Just come to edit, come to preferences, come down here to key maps, key map, and then in this second menu here that says spacebar action, make sure it's on search. So remember, once it's on search, it's easy for you as a beginner to search anything that you want to do in Blender. So this is Blender. If you've never used a 3D software before, this can look extremely intimidating. Believe me, I've been here before, so I understand how it feels. However, here is the fun part. You don't need to use everything in Blender. In fact, there is this hypothesis I have towards learning new softwares, which is think of every new software as a house, and that house has multiple rooms within it. Now, and depending on what you want to do, you will find yourself visiting certain rooms multiple times, and some rooms you will not visit at all. We are going to be looking at the 20%, the small part of the UI that you'll be using constantly. To be more specific, for this particular video, we would just be using 5 windows, and this is the order at which we'll be using them. If this is your first time using a 3D software, you might not be familiar with how to navigate in that 3D software. And the secret to how do you look around, how do you zoom in, zoom out, if you secret to this is your mouse. So if you scroll up on the mouse wheel, you will zoom into your objects and zoom out. Scrolling up and down zooms in and zooms out. Now, holding that mouse wheel, just clicking on it, click on it now, don't scroll, just click on the mouse wheel and move up and down. Not scrolling, clicking on the mouse wheel and moving up and down. That is to orbit around the space. That helps you to rotate and look around a 3D object in 3D space. So rotating your mouse up and down zooms in and out, clicking and dragging, clicking that middle mouse button and dragging will allow you to orbit or look around the 3D space or your 3D scene. Then holding shift. Now hold on, I know that this is a lot of shortcuts for you to memorize now. Holding shift and clicking around will help you to pan or to move left and right around your viewport, your 3D viewport. So remember, roll your mouse. With the secret to navigating 3D space is this your middle mouse button. Very important. So scrolling up and down will help you to zoom in. Clicking on the mouse wheel and moving around will help you to rotate and look around the viewport. And then holding shift and clicking that middle mouse button and moving it around will help you to pan. This is called panning, pan around the viewport. So if that is too difficult for you, you can see this gizmos button, these buttons here. If you click on the y-axis and move around, it will help you to rotate. If you click on it and move around, it will help you to rotate around the viewport. If you click on this zoom button and just click up and down, if you click on this zoom button and just move up your mouse up and down, you will be able to zoom in. If you click on this hand button, it will move your viewport around, and ignore the other part, but these are the main things. This is to rotate around your view. This is to zoom into your view, and this is to pan around the view. So those are the three major things. And if you watched our 3D explainer video, you would notice that this gizmo, this is called the gizmo, has the X, the Y, and the Z axis, like I showed you in that video. In Blender, the Y axis is forward and backward, the X axis is left and right, and the Z axis is up and down. You just have to get used to that. That is how to navigate the viewport. However, what if you don't have a mouse? Because I know that there are some of us who might be following this tutorial with a laptop and you've stubbornly decided to use your laptop's trackpad to navigate the UI. Now, without a mouse, you can use these gizmos to navigate your UI, or let me show you something, a quick trick. Come to Edit, come to Preferences, come to Inputs, and enable 3-button mouse. And also, if you don't have a keyboard as well, enable emulate numpad. I'm going to show you what that means very soon. Just enable emulate numpad and enable 3-button mouse. So what does a 3-mouse button do? It takes away that it makes it such that if you don't have the middle mouse button, which is exclusive to a mouse, if you just have your laptop's trackpad, you can press Alt on your keyboard, the Alt key on your keyboard, and click. If you click your left click, you can now move around the object. You can rotate around the object, orbit the object with Alt and left click on your mouse. And then if you press Shift and Alt together, you can pan your view around. So those are the two ways you can use these gizmos, or you can enable the 3-button mouse. So you can use the Alt key, Alt and left mouse and left click, Alt and left click to move around the UI, and Shift, Alt and left click to pan around the UI. And that is how you can navigate the software without a mouse if you don't have a mouse. So you're probably asking me, okay, Treasure, looking around this object is nice, but how do I interact with it? How do I move it? How do I do something with this object? The first thing you need to do to interact with an object is to first select it. And to do that, you need to come to your toolbar, make sure your selection box or selection tool is enabled, and then click on the object Now you'll notice on the outliner here, the cube has been selected. This outliner shows a list of all the objects in your 3D scene. We'll revisit it more as time goes on. So now you see that the cube is selected and this orange outline highlight has appeared over the object. It shows that it is selected. To deselect an object, just click on the empty space. It is deselected. To select it, you click on the object and it is selected. So you are still asking me, yes, thank you for showing me how to select, but how do I actually do something with this object? How do I move this object? How do I interact with it? So there are three main ways you can interact with an object in 3D space. You can move an object, you can rotate it, you can scale that object, which means increasing or reducing its size. You can also change its properties like its color, its shape, stuff like that. So let's focus on the first one, which is moving an object. So before we do that, please press the N key, N for night, on your keyboard, and this bar will appear. There's a reason I asked you to do this. You'll find out soon. So now back to moving an object. So move an object, you can either use the shortcut called G for grab on your keyboard, and if you move your mouse around, you'll notice that the object follows wherever you move your mouse to. So now you can move your mouse around and just position it somewhere that you want, and then the object automatically moves to that location. Again, G for grab. And once you've gotten the desired location you want to put the object, you can press left click on your mouse and it will place the object in that location. Now remember I said there are two ways to move an object in Blender. You can press G on your keyboard, G for grab to move the object around, and left click to confirm where you want to move the object. Control Z to move that back. Or you can come over here to the move tool in your toolbar. So if you click on it, you will notice that your object has these arrows around it. These are arrows that are used to move the object. And the red arrow moves the object on the red axis, the Y on the red axis or red direction. If you watched our 3D explainer video, we explained what each of these directions are in that video. The green arrow will move it on the Y direction and the blue arrow will move it on the X direction, which is up and down. So if you move it, you click on any of these arrows and drag, it will move your object in the corresponding directions. So that is how you can move objects in Blender. So one more thing to note about moving an object with shortcuts is that using these arrows to move an object is the same as pressing your G key, that G for grab, and pressing X. So once you press, let's go again, G for grab and press X. So once you press X or Y or Z after pressing the G button, you are constraining the movement by that axis or that direction. So if you press G and press Y, you'll notice this green line appears, and now no matter how you move your mouse, it will always move on the Y axis or Y direction. If you press G and press Z, it will always move on the Z axis or Z direction. If you press G and press X, it will only be constrained on the X direction or X axis. So if you press G and you don't press anything, you can move the object freely. But if you press G and you press the corresponding axis, which is the X, Y, or Z axis, you will move that object on only that axis. So this is a way for you to have better control over the movement of your objects or the position of your objects. Now, rotation. Rotation is the same as moving in the sense that you can also move it both by the shortcuts, and the shortcut for rotation is R on your keyboard. If you press R and you just move your mouse around, it's going to rotate the 3D object freely. If you click, it will accept or confirm that rotation. So if you press Ctrl Z, you can go back. Again, if arrow on your keyboard, arrow for rotate. So if you press the X, just like that G, if you press the X, you would limit the rotation to just the X axis. If you press Y, you will limit the rotation to just the Y axis. If you press Z, you will limit the rotation to just the Z axis. You can do that, or you can click on the rotate icon over here, the rotate tool over here, and then depending on the axis you click on, it will rotate on that axis. So if you click on this curved or C shape in the middle, the green one is the Y axis. If you click on it, it will rotate the object on the Y axis. If you click on the red one, it will rotate it on the red axis, the X axis. If you click on the green one, on the blue one, it will rotate the object on the Z axis. So that is how you rotate an object. So now the final thing is scale. So now the final thing is scale. To scale an object, you press S. S for scale, S on your keyboard to scale an object, and it will increase or reduce the size. So once you're satisfied with the size, you left click and it will position the object and it would scale that object. So you can use that, or you can come to the scale tool over here, and again you would, and you can click on the, if you click on the outside circle over here, you can scale it uniformly, meaning that you can scale everything together. Or again, if you click on just this, any of these arrows, it would scale only on that along that direction. So if I click on the green arrow and scale it, it will scale. We'll undo this so we can see a bit better. So if I click on this white arrow outside, I can scale everything together at once. If I decide no, if I click only on this green arrow, which is the y-axis, I'll scale. If I click on any of these arrows, I will scale the object, or I will increase the size of the object on only that one axis. So if I click on the green arrow, which is the y-axis, it will increase the size only on that y-axis. If I click on the blue arrow, which is the z-axis, it will increase the size only on the z-axis, make it taller or shorter. If I click on the red arrow, which is the x-axis, it will increase the size only on the x-axis. So that is how to move, rotate, and scale an object. So next thing we're going to talk about is adding objects, because at this point you're most likely, because you are probably bored of using just cubes. You want to find out, are there other objects that we can add in Blender? So the answer is yes. Blender has multiple types, has many types of objects. However, there are three major objects that you will be interacting with the most over the course of this tutorial, and those are 3D meshes. A mesh is just a fancy name for a 3D shape. We'll go into details of why it's called that later. We also have lights, and we'll have cameras. So those are the three major types of objects that we will be interacting with over the duration of this course. So to add objects in Blender, it's as simple as going up here to the add button, and when you hover on it, you'll notice that it tells you that the shortcut is Shift A. So you can come here, press the add button. It will show you the types of objects you want to add. So you can select another cube. It's currently hidden inside a bigger cube. If we go to our move tool and just move it out, you can see we have a cube. You know what? Let's move this guy out of the way for other cubes. So you can press add here to add your object, or you can press Shift and A on your keyboard. Shift and A. Hold Shift, and while holding Shift, press A on your keyboard, and then the add menu will appear. So you can add different types of objects. You can add a sphere. This is a sphere. And the sphere, you can shift A, add a cone. You can shift A, add a monkey into your Blender has a monkey shape, and you can add that into your scene. You can also rotate them around. You can scale them. S on your keyboard to scale. You can scale them. You can arrow on your keyboard to rotate. You can rotate them around. Press escape so you don't save that. And if you accidentally added a shape or an object that you don't like, you can click on that object and press X on your keyboard. It will bring up delete button, delete menu, and you can delete that object. So Ctrl Z again to show you X on your keyboard to delete, or you can just press delete on your keyboard. This will still delete it. So that is how to add objects in Blender. So let's add a few more objects to the scene, more cubes. I'm sorry, make sure we're in the move tool. More cubes, move it around, just for fun, just to explore the types of objects we have. Now, you will notice that each time we're adding a new object, they all appear at the same place. All the objects that we have been adding have been coming up in this middle of the screen here. However, what if I told you they don't have to appear in the middle of the screen? You can actually make sure that when you press add and you add your object, it can be added anywhere in this 3D environment. And the reason they are being added in the middle of the screen is because of something called a cursor. Now, if you click on this, now if you notice, there is this circle in the middle of our scene. So that circle is called a cursor. Now, wherever this cursor is where the objects will be added in 3D space. So make sure you're in cursor mode over on your toolbar, and make sure you select the cursor tool over on your toolbar. And if you click anywhere, you would notice that the cursor will follow you wherever you click. So if I click somewhere around here and I come to add and I add another monkey head, you notice the monkey head appears where the cursor is. If I click somewhere else here and I come again and I add a sphere, the sphere will appear where that cursor is. So anywhere the cursor is where you can add an object. So that is how to add objects. So that is how to have better control over where you can add your objects. So again, you can even put the cursor on top of other objects. So if I click on this, on top of this cube that we scaled, although it's a cuboid now, we add a monkey again to it, you will notice that it appears on top of the monkey. The monkey appears on top of the cube. So the only thing there is one more thing I will have to warn you about when it comes to using the cursor, which is that when the cursor mode is activated or when the cursor tool is activated, you can't select on objects. So this thing usually catches me as a 3D professional. Sometimes I'm trying to click on an object and it's not clicking. So to solve that, make sure it's not in cursor. Make sure you are not in cursor mode. Your cursor tool is not selected and your selection tool is selected instead. Because if cursor tool is selected, you can't select on the objects. You can only move anywhere you click. It's just moving the mouse cursor. But if you have your selection box selected, you can now click and select objects and you can move them around. So before we move, let's just save this as a project. So to save, you come over to File, come to Save, and determine where you want the file to be saved. So I would save on my desktop. Just to create a folder. You can click this place to create a folder. So we'll call that folder Blender course. And in that folder, it's going to give you a name called untitled.blend. So you give it your whatever name you want. So we'll call it first project. And press save Blender file, and it will save. And now your first project in Blender has been created. So you can play around with this scene just to familiarize yourself with how to add objects into a 3D scene. So before we move, a quick recap on what we talked about in this navigation phase. We covered viewport navigation, how to use your mouse keys, your middle mouse button to look around your 3D scene. And for those who don't have a mouse, you can enable the emulate 3-button mouse on the preferences and use the Alt key to look around your scene. So we also talked about how to interact with objects, how to select objects. We also talked about how to manipulate objects. We talked about how to move objects, how to rotate objects, how to scale objects. We showed you how to do that with the toolbar and how to do that with shortcuts. We also talked about object types, how to add objects, and we talked about object types, how to add objects, how to delete them, and we also touched a bit on the cursor tool and also how to save your file. So with this covered navigation phase, let's create a proper project now in the creation phase.
And that's all for the navigation phase. Now in our next video, we're going to enter into the creation phase, whereby you are going to be able to create your first project in Blender. So check that out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected.
Enjoy all these premium courses in this channel for free.
Call you can't deny, better find a place.